It is 10:30. Did you want to wait to start the recording?
Why don't we wait a minute, because without staff here,
Yes.
Lenny and I are going to look at each other.
Well, the staff is here. They're just not admitted yet, right?
Did you want to wait to start the recording?
Are the staff just in the waiting room?
I don't see them on the participants list.
There's Scott.
Okay.
So Councilmember Vasquez should be connecting in a minute.
Okay, good.
There's Ryan. Okay. Ah, there she is.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to the monthly meeting of the Land Use and Environment Committee. Could I have a motion to approve our agenda, please?
Move to approve the agenda as published.
Second.
All right. Any comments on the agenda? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? No. So today we have Ryan, who's going to be walking us through the revised tree ordinance with the updates on it. So Ryan, are you ready to take it away?
Yeah, good morning. So I am actually going to be walking through some of the provisions for single family residential applications of our tree ordinance. As you're well aware, the council has adopted the updates to our urban forest management plan, and you've been going through our draft regulation amendments that have come out of our ad hoc tree committee, as well as what is recommended by the Planning Commission. Since that time, you have received some public comment during your city council meetings that has raised some concerns about removing a certain permit requirement related to single family residential uses, and that is typically known as the 5 trees in a 3-year period requirement. And so the Planning Commission is recommending to remove that. We wanted to make sure that the council was aware of that, the reasons why, be able to ask some questions before it got to the full council. So this isn't a surprise. That we are preparing the full suite of municipal code amendments associated with the urban forest management plan for council, and that is scheduled for your meeting on March 17th. So this will be really the last opportunity before that full council meeting to consider any additional, amendments or ask questions, those kinds of things before we get to that point. So with that, I will share my screen. I don't have a PowerPoint, but I did want to run through some of our regulations with you. See, Scott has his hand up.
Yeah, Ryan, hey, just for clarification, because I know we've had at least one, if not 2 work sessions on this issue, and maybe just for clarity and for background, there were a number of recommendations that the Planning Commission did provide or put forward. Council acknowledged those, but maybe did not adopt all of those. And then we're now left with kind of I'll say the narrow scope left over, which was really related to the removal of trees. And there was a lot of discussion about HOAs. And I think that also bled into a discussion about commercial properties too, when it comes to their open space or tree tract areas. Do you want to maybe provide a little bit of context to that?
Sure. So, we had a work session back in December, specifically looking at the issue of the HOA open space trees, as well as trees within existing commercial developments. And we put together language that the council gave us good direction on that. With this suite of amendments, you haven't yet formally acted on the actual ordinance. And so this ordinance is going to be a large package of a bunch of different amendments. Part of that will be the HOA and commercial amendments. Part of it will be just some language cleanup and things that we identified through the update to the regulations. And then this last major one that seems to be somewhat emerging, and we want to be able to tackle it with the council, or at least the land use committee before it gets to the full council, is this regulation about the private trees on private residential lots. Does that make sense? Councilmember Greenstone?
Yeah, just one question. So I get we haven't acted, formally acted on it because you're going to put it all together for one action when we're all done. But we have kind of pretty much approved all of those other pieces, right? Because we worked through them and then we came to agreement on everything, right?
Exactly. So
Okay.
yes. You haven't acted on the full ordinance. You've acted on portions of it, but not adoption. So you've come to consensus on direction. And so, again, it's just kind of, and this is really not necessarily needing any direction here today. It's more informational. And if the council wants to go a different direction, this should be brought up at that council meeting on the 17th, where we can look at, do we change things as a result of this discussion?
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I was clear.
Robin?
I think because I shifted from the planning commission onto the council, I think I might have missed some of the meetings where a lot of this stuff got discussed. So in the full package ordinance, does it still reference the recommendation to target a 43% canopy cover? Because that's what the last survey of our canopy cover for Lacey indicated we had, and we wanted to keep it there and not go below that threshold.
Yeah, yes, that's not contained in the regulations. That's not a regulation per se, it's a policy. And so that policy is contained in the urban forest management plan that the council has already updated. And so, and there's language within that says if we start to fall below, I think it's actually 38%, I want to say, that if we start falling below that, then we need to take another look at our regulations to make sure that we're not losing more canopy. So that's not a regulation, but it is a policy which has already been adopted.
Yeah, that's a valuable distinction, the difference between the rules and regulations versus the policy, which is more like our goals.
Exactly, yeah. Yep. Okay, so let's do this one more time here. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see that on the screen there. So for single family residential lots, there are, and for all types of development, there are specific exemptions from permit requirements that are contained within our municipal code. And it's this 1432.050 exemptions. And so what I'll do is just go briefly through these just so you're aware of them. The first is, so these don't require a land clearing permit. They do maybe require another permit or an exemption permit allowance, but they don't require a land clearing permit. So the first one is a land use application. So that's fairly straightforward. Our land clearing applications are wrapped into the land use applications. So you're exempted from an individual tree removal permit if you are doing a land use application. B and C are related. There's an allowance to remove a hazard tree or an unhealthy tree, a dead or diseased or dying tree. I'm going to skip D because that's the purpose of what we're going to talk about here today. But E is anything that if you were to build a house or an addition or a driveway, basically allows you to remove any tree that's within the footprint of whatever you're constructing. And I believe it's 10 feet outside of that footprint as well. And then F is clear vision. So any trees that are on private property that are maybe within a clear vision triangle of an intersection or those kinds of things that would cause to be in a clear sight line at an intersection, those could be removed as well. So let's get back to D, and that's the purpose of what we're here today. And this is really when people say, I need a permit to remove a tree on my lot from City Hall, this is really what they are getting. They are getting an exemption permit. So it basically means you are not getting a full land clearing permit, but you have gone to City Hall and got an exemption. We provide an orange card for people to put on their lot so their neighbors are aware. And it allows for up to the removal of 5 trees in any 36-month period. So 5 trees in a 3-year period. Provided, and then there's some other allowance, provided you're not in an environmentally sensitive area, et cetera. And then that last sentence is an exemption must be issued by the city of Lacey prior to the removal of trees under this provision. So again, that exemption is your essentially your approval from the city to be able to do what you want. The second, so that's the permit requirement. And I want to make sure that we're clear on the distinction between a permit requirement and a regulation. So that's the piece of, the piece of paperwork you need to do is that permit exemption. This is the regulation. And so I believe it was 2006, we added this threshold for trees on a lot. And I'll show you about midway down. All developed single family and multifamily lots are required to retain 4 trees per 5,000 square feet. So this is the regulation. So if you are coming to our city hall and to our counter and you said, hey, I've got a 5,000 square foot lot, I want to remove 4 trees. We'd say, okay, that's under the 5 tree limit in a 3-year period. You can do that and we can issue an exemption, but you have to retain or replant your 4 trees per 5,000 square feet. So if you had a 5,000 square foot lot, you could remove all 4. Every 3 years, you could clear cut your property and replant 4 trees every 5 years or every 3 years, excuse me, to reach this threshold. So we have kind of almost 2 overlapping different, what could appear like regulations, but they're not. One is a permit requirement and one is the regulations themselves. The confusing part of this is that the permit requirement is also acting as almost a de facto regulation because we are issuing permits over the counter for removal of 5 trees or less in a 3-year period. People don't want to remove 6 trees because if they know if they do that, then they have to go through a more arduous permit process. So I hope that explains that. Actually, I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now and answer any questions that you might have on the distinction between the permit requirement of the 3 trees in a 5-year or 5 trees in a 3-year period versus the regulation requirement of 4 trees per 5,000 square feet.
This is sort of a foundational question, but why is one of those things only listed in the exemptions area as a permit requirement and one of them in regulation? Like historically, why did it end up that way?
Yeah,
we may have
question.
gone over this 6 months ago, but I don't remember.
Yeah, great question. So, 20 years ago when I was working for the city, we did not have the 4 trees per 5,000 square foot requirement. It was all, as long as you had 5 trees, you could remove the 5 trees in a 3-year period. There was no regulation associated with it. The council at the time, in about 2006, became concerned with some of the clear cutting that was happening on properties in South Lacey with some of the newer residential development on smaller lots. And at that point, established a tree ratio requirement. That's where that 4 trees per 5,000 square foot came in after the fact. And so right now, and never did remove the permit requirement from the scope. So that's why you have the original, the 5 trees in a 3-year period, plus you have the council add-on of the 4 trees in a 5,000 on a 5,000 square foot lot. So that's why they're not in the same place. They're in different places because the 4 trees in a 5,000 square foot came later.
That makes sense. So the no more than 5 trees in 3 years permit requirement predates that language in the regulation.
Correct.
Got it.
Any other questions before I move on? So yeah, as mentioned,
Ryan, that's an
Go ahead.
important distinction, just because the density requirement actually is a higher standard. So again, going previous to that, you could theoretically remove all the trees and there was no replanting effort. And so council at the time during the mid 2000s wanted to ensure we still had an urban county canopy. That's why the tree density became such an issue.
Yes, yeah.
And I think
And-
both of these regulations have value because one of them addresses the pace at which you can cut trees, and the other is about maintaining a certain number of trees. So they don't actually directly conflict, although it's weird that they're in two different places. Better alignment would maybe be better, easier for people to understand.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about the proposal here in a little bit, but the purpose of removing that threshold is that both the permit requirement with the 5 trees in a 3-year period and the standard, the 4 trees in a 5,000 square foot, are confusing to administer, and they conflate the permit requirement from the standards. So, that's important to note, is that basically, the 3 trees or the 5 trees in a 3-year period has acted as almost a regulation because people don't want to take down that 6th tree, right? Because then it pushes them into a higher level of permit, which they don't want to necessarily go through. Which brings me to the next point, which is our property sizes are, when it comes to single family residential, are vastly different across the community. We've got, 3,000 square foot lots in some places, and we have, half-acre lots along a lot of our lakes. And so, when you're looking at these permit requirements, a 3,000 square foot lot might only have 2 trees on it, and they're able to take those 2 trees down every 3 years. They could take those same 2 trees down. But when it comes to a large residential lot, you may have a forested parcel of a half an acre, and you're still only allowed to take down up to 5 trees under that permit requirement. And so when we're looking at this, because we get a lot of concern about larger properties, maybe after, a windstorm comes along or those types of things where they want to take a wholesale look at, well, maybe I don't need so many trees on my lot. What can I do? Well, I'm sorry, you're stuck. Unless you want to go through a big permit requirement, you're stuck with having to be, more gradual in how you take those trees down, with only taking down 5 every 3 years. And so a lot of times we get people every 3 years, they're taking down 5 more trees, 5 more trees, 5 more trees, even though they may be above the tree ratio that's required for their large forested parcel. Does that make sense? So, we get those big fluctuations in properties. Everybody is treated the same when it comes to permit requirements, even though, you may have 100 trees on your lot or you may have 2. We say, well, sorry, unless, you're able to take down 5 in a 3-year period with that permit. So when we looked at this, or when the tree committee looked at this, they came up with some draft regulations some draft recommendations that I'm going to pull up here on the screen and share with you now. So this is actually the draft that will be going to the council on March 17th, and that specific section D, individual lot exemption. You can see on your screen there, maybe I can blow it up a couple too, just so everybody can see it nice and big, is that you can see that a lot of the language is proposed to being removed from that. So the proposed language would still allow for individual lots to be exempted from land clearing permit requirements, provided that their tree density minimums of 4 trees per 5,000 square feet are being maintained. So if you remember the regulation, the 4 trees and 5,000, we're saying, if you keep that, then there is no bigger permit for you. So for example, if you had a 5,000 square foot lot, you wanted to remove those 4 trees, you could under this exemption, but you'd have to replant to meet that requirement. So we've handled it through those smaller lots. For those larger lots, at the end, there is a new section added. So if you go through the text, you can see the cross-through text there that is being proposed for removal, which is covered in other sections of the code and kind of duplicative. We don't need this here. But really, we're saying if you are wanting to remove more than 5 trees, you must have a review done by our forester. completed prior to the permit being approved. So that is just like the land clearing permit, except that you are not going through that full administrative process associated with a land clearing permit. You could remove more than 5 trees at our counter, provided that you did have a report from our arborist. And really, we heard from our arborists on this, and they said, we feel like it's really important, we being the arborists, that we be able to do more field education and outreach while also assessing individual sites and surroundings. And so the arborists are actually recommending that for this more than 5 tree requirement, that they go out there and do a site assessment, that they can talk to people, they can talk to neighboring property owners and those kinds of things, where we get these larger proposals for tree removal requests. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. That's what we have for you today. I just wanted to make sure that you were clear that that was coming your way. You've received comments that have been from others that have recommended keeping the 5 tree in a 3-year period as is, because it allows for more incremental removal of trees rather than more wholesale removal. But I think for our purposes, we're comfortable, staff is comfortable, as long as we are getting our arborist out there for those removals that are more than 5 trees. So 6 or more trees, that our arborist will be out there doing education, identifying trees that can be removed, identifying other trees that shouldn't be removed. And as long as people are under those permit or the regulation requirements of 4 trees per 5,000, that they be able to do that under that exemption allowance, under that permit allowance. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Is there a scenario in which if the arborist were to go out and review the requested site to remove more than 5 trees, they would say, no, not a good idea? Like, what does that review really look like?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The arborist goes out, and usually they are looking at specific trees that a property owner requests to be removed. So if it's the entire site, they'll look at the entire site. If it's 10 trees, they'll look at those 10 trees. They're not necessarily going to look at stuff that because these are going to be something that somebody's going to have to pay for. So, the more time they spend on the site, the more somebody's going to have to pay for that out of pocket. So really, they're looking at the specific trees. And there could be specific trees in there that the arborist does not recommend for removal. Whether that's going to affect other trees on the site. If you're going to remove some trees and make others less wind firm, that could always be raised through this review. If you are going to be removing trees that are going to impact neighboring properties, the viability of trees on other properties, that might be another recommendation for not removing these trees.
Are we concerned about the workload this might create?
No, in fact, it makes it less work for our staff, because they don't have to worry about the 2 requirements, right? Right now we have the 5 trees in a 3-year period overlaid with the 4 trees per 5,000. This actually gets rid of the 5 trees in a 3-year period. So we don't have to track that anymore. We don't need to do the work that's associated with that. All we're looking at is the 2006 4 trees in a 5,000 square foot regulation that came along. If it does create any work, it would be for our arborists that would do more site assessments for those that are requests more than 5 trees, for removals of more than 5 trees. The good thing about those is that those are generally paid back by property owners. So those people that are doing those big requests would be on the hook to be able to pay for the arborist time on those larger requests.
Lenny, do you have any comments? Okay, I have a couple of questions. One is, you mentioned early on when the 2006 council was concerned about the shrinking canopy with a lot of clear cutting of residential lots. What it seems like the safeguards that council was concerned about maybe shifting a little bit under the proposed changes here. I've been getting a ton of mail. I was out in Northeast Lacey last week and heard a lot of deep concern about the clear cutting that's going on up there. So what can we say to the public about tree canopy, and is there a trigger within this that says, oops, we're getting below this amount, we're going to have to make some changes here?
Yeah, I mean, that brings up probably some bigger discussions than just what's contained in this little section of our ordinance related to residential properties. What you're kind of speaking of more is things that are covered in our urban forest management plan, things like outreach and education. So, we currently do not have an in-house city arborist, somebody that, their job is to, do the education and outreach work with our community. And so that's a recommendation coming out of the plan, is that we do have that. There's also a recommendation that we have a tree board. I know the council has been talking about that some here in the last little while. Basically an advisory board that would advise the city council on tree issues. We do have a trigger, and the trigger is, we have that current kind of like baseline inventory of our urban canopy, and we say, if we fall below that, then we need to take another look at our regulations. So it is a bigger discussion part of how the community envisions developing in and around trees in the future. And that's something that's contained in our urban forest management plan, not specifically in this individual regulation though.
Right. Okie doke.
I'd add to that too, that we will very likely be looking at the regulations themselves again in the context of both the urban forestry management plan implementation, but also after we get the data back from the climate action process and the carbon sequestration. I can never say that. Sequestration project at the Climate Action Steering Committee. So, we're not in the real implementation phase of the urban forestry management plan yet. We're going to start working on that, and it's very likely we'll be updating the actual regulations for trees at some point in the future.
Grant, yeah, and you anticipated my next question was, how we're linking that with the climate mitigation plan and the carbon sequestration issues. So do you have I don't want to pin you to a date, but do you have a rough feel for timeline on what you're talking about there?
Well, I think we'll definitely have, I would say next year's work program would include some of this work, but a lot of it's going to depend on when we get the study back from the sequestration project. So, because we don't want to keep opening this up, we want to try to be as efficient as possible as we update our codes.
Sure.
Is that all fair, Ryan?
Yeah, and I was just going to add, I think that's a great point that Grant had, and really, when we think of trees, we're really thinking of them in terms of the context of the city, but we also need to think of trees regionally and the importance that trees play in rural Thurston County, and how does some of those protections and those resources that we do have in Thurston County offset some of the impacts that we have to create, because we are a developing city, and the Growth Management Act says, the cities should have urban development. Cities that's the priority is to have cities be urban and rural areas be rural, and the rural helps offset some of those impacts from the urban. And so I think that what that sequestration study will do is will give us a better idea of the role of the urban part, as well as the role of the rural part, and to basically link together, what trees mean regionally versus just us looking at them very myopically, right? From a city perspective.
Interesting. Okay, anybody, thank you all. And I don't want to end this meeting without expressing my appreciation for all the work that the Planning Commission has done on this, that the Community and Economic Development staff has done on this, and the rewrites and the reiterations. So, and council for all that we've been receiving the feedback on from the community as well. So thank you so much. Really appreciate that.
Thanks for your work on this, Ryan. It's been a lot.
Yeah, you're welcome. Trees are, as you all are aware, a very, hot topic, continues to be and has been for, and will continue to be for a long time. So,
Forever.
So we're happy to wrap up this part of the process. It's been a long time. We started with the tree committee even pre-COVID. So what you're seeing here started in 2019, and so we're, like Grant said, we're ready to start doing some more implementation, get out of the mode of just updating the plan and some of those things, and getting more into the actual implementation of some of those things, and this will do that.
Gotcha. All righty. Well, if there's nothing else, I'd love to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Right. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Righty. Well, thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Council.